Very undercovered and underappreciated issue, so we particularly appreciate your effort in coming to get briefed. I should also say that Howard Wolpe, the director of the Africa Programme, should actually be sitting in this chair. He's abroad at the moment, or away at the moment, and couldn't be here. And I just want to, though, thank him very much for hosting the event, and they've been a marvellous partner for us at OSI on many occasions. Okay. Aha. Come in, sir. We have the last member of our panel. How do you do? Aqua Mercy. Oh, okay. Please take a seat, sir. We'll continue. So, we are, as an organisation, Open Society Institute considers the situation in Mauritania to be of intense interest from the point of view of governance, from the point of view of human rights, and because there is a new government there that is obviously making enormous efforts to move situations forward that have been stuck for many years. And hence we wanted to take the opportunity of having some visitors here with us in Washington for a couple of days to allow them to do a briefing on a particular issue of concern, that of slavery. Those of you who follow the issue will know that slavery has been practiced in Mauritania for hundreds of years. There have been repeated efforts to outlaw it, to ban it, and yet it has continued. The new government came into power in April last year and made it a priority to criminalize slavery with a new law 4 months after it entered power. And that law is a big advance on the situation that existed before. The question now is about implementation, about the pace of progress and the commitment of all parties, governmental and non-governmental, to take this reform forward. So hopefully today we'll be able to give you some sense both of how it has been in the past, but also where this issue is going and what people here in Washington can do to support the reform and the transformation that has been begun. We're going to start by showing you a small video. It's just a few minutes long. And after we've done that, I will introduce the speakers properly and allow them to start speaking. So, can I ask my colleagues to move out this way, and we'll just watch the video. So, if I could just give you a chance. Just take the chair.
La Mauritanie est composée de 30% de morts blancs, 30% de négros africains, donc Poulard, Soninké et Wolof confondus, et de 40% de Haratines. Les Haratines, de façon générale, ont ce qu'on appelle le travail subalterne, dans la plupart des cas. Pour ceux qui vivent en brousse, c'est le gardiennage du troupeau, c'est le travail de la houe. C'est également le travail domestique au profit des maîtres.
L'esclave, c'est un bien, c'est une propriété. Il est vendable, il est cédable. On peut le frapper, on peut le tuer. Il n'a pas le droit à l'héritage, il n'a pas le droit à la propriété. Il peut élever ses enfants, mais pour qu'ils servent quelqu'un d'autre, on peut le lui arracher à tout moment. Il n'a pas d'avenir. Il est ancré dans l'esprit de ce qu'on appelle aussi bien l'esclave que le maître, que le problème de l'esclavage est un problème religieux. Et bien donc il s'agit là parfois pour l'esclave d'une fatalité, Eh bien, donc, c'est Dieu qui l'a voulu ainsi et il se résigne. Donc, en réalité, le problème, c'est que les gens intériorisent même leur statut.
أسبابه عندهم هم لأنهم ماسين عبيدهم بعدين عملنا كامل الملك بعدين ما عندنا حق في التراب.
سمعت إنه ممنوع عالم ذيك الدشرة يكبوا في يشروا منها 50 غرام من الواقع وكل ليلة مهاجمين كل ليلة مهاجمين كل ليلة مهاجمينهم عاد يرحل.
Est-ce que tu as des esclaves ou tu avais des esclaves?
Je crois que la famille avait des esclaves.
Quelles sont les relations qu'elle entretient encore avec ces esclaves-là?
Bon, ce sont des relations particulières qui ne peuvent pas être généralisées. Bon, je m'excuse, je les prends en charge. C'est le contraire maintenant, mais des relations particulières.
Est-ce que vous connaissez des familles esclavagistes?
Oui.
Elles les demeurent encore? Elles ont toujours leurs esclaves?
Elles ont toujours leurs esclaves. Notre vieux nous disait toujours de demander excuse à Dieu parce qu'on avait des esclaves.
Il n'y a pas d'esclavage en Mauritanie, je l'affirme. Ça n'existe pas. Il y a des gens qui, comme je vous l'ai dit, cherchent à justifier leur statut, cherchent à justifier un certain nombre de choses pour pouvoir s'établir. Pour nous, on ignore cela. La loi est claire, la constitution est claire. Tout le monde est libre.
Ce qu'il y a, c'est qu'il y a des opposants à l'actuel pouvoir qui ont la perception de la vie politique en Mauritanie et ils utilisent le tremplin des forums de droits de l'homme pour faire valoir un certain nombre de choses. Accuser par exemple la Mauritanie d'être un État esclavagiste, c'est quand même faire le jeu de ce n'est pas une vérité. Je pense que je viens de vous répondre. J'ai dit que l'esclavage n'existe pas en Mauritanie. Vous êtes journaliste ou vous êtes polémiste? Là, j'arrête la discussion parce que je vous répondais pendant que vous étiez journaliste. Voilà.
I wish somebody. Yes, it's un peu vieux. I didn't realize, I should have said at the beginning that this video was actually dated from the period before the new government. And so it gives you a picture of where things were rather than how things necessarily are. That said, clearly it takes a great deal of time for things to change on the ground, and I hope that what we'll find out today is the extent to which that change is taking place. Now, I'm very honoured to be able to introduce my guests. I've just got to find my bios here, which I had. I'll just do it from my far right, Romana Cacchioli. She is the head of the Africa team for the organisation based in Britain called Anti-Slavery International. It's very, very old, hundreds of years, dates its work back to the transatlantic slave trade. And they have made a particular focus of their work in Mauritania. To my immediate right, Boubacar Ould Massaoud. He's the president and founder of SOS Esclave. It's an NGO in Mauritania that has led on this issue. He is himself a professional, an architect, but I believe born into a family of slaves and has now adjusted his career and his life to work full-time on fighting this issue. And then I'm extremely glad to be able to introduce also the ambassador of Mauritania, who is here very kindly to give his thoughts on progress since the law was passed. And I've asked him to act as a discussant, having heard the comments of the other two, to give his perspectives. So thank you very much for being here, sir. I'm going to immediately hand over to Romana and ask you to kick off. I should perhaps have said that Boubacar will speak in French and Romana will translate. But let that not be a constraint on either people's desire to ask questions or hold a conversation. That will be fine. We'll work that out. Romana.
Thank you, Aquin. Thank you all very much for coming, and I'm not going to take too much time speaking on behalf of Anti-Slavery International. I'm going to pass straight over to Boubacar. But just to let you know, just as Akwe said, I'm very proud to say that I represent an organisation that is probably the oldest NGO, human rights organisation in the world, set up to fight the transatlantic slave trade, and continued to campaign so that slavery today has been is abolished, is illegal in international human rights law and international law, but also we've campaigned at the national level globally. And whilst slavery is now abolished in most countries, we are still struggling to have slavery eradicated in practice. Anti-Slavery International today works on all forms of contemporary forms of slavery, including human trafficking and bonded labour in South Asia and human trafficking globally, as well as worse forms of child labour. But my particular interest is in what we call descent-based slavery. And I've been working for the past 4 years very closely with partners on the ground in West Africa, mostly in Niger and in Mali and in Mauritania, where we have successfully campaigned in 2003 to have slavery criminalised in Niger. And in Niger, we won our first case, our first slavery case under that law in November 2006. In Mali, we are working with local partners to establish to what extent slavery still remains, particularly up in the northern parts of the country in the nomadic communities. And we've been working very closely with Boubacar of SOS Esclave, but also with other civil society groups. And I must stress that, in fact, the passing into law in Mauritania was part of a collaboration of civil society actors who came together. And these were sons and daughters of people who'd been enslaved, but also sons of masters. I think it's really important today to realise that children of people who have held slaves are also part of this movement. So it's a broad-ranging movement. So that said, with the permission of the ambassador, I'm going to hand over to Boubacar. You'll have to forgive me. I'm not a professional interpreter, so bear with me with the interpretation. C'est Boubacar, je te présente si tu veux lancer dans...
Oui, merci. Je vais essayer de vous parler de l'esclavage directement sans me présenter parce que je crois qu'on m'a suffisamment présenté. Cependant, je m'occupe de l'esclavage depuis pratiquement une 50aine d'années. Je suis fils d'esclave.
I'm going to get straight into my presentation without too much ado, as I think several people have already introduced me. I'm the president of SOS Esclave. I'm the son of a slave.
J'ai eu la chance d'aller à l'école en 1952. Et à l'époque, j'étais le seul de ma famille à aller à l'école et le premier.
I was lucky enough to be the only son of my parents, lucky enough to go to school.
J'ai appris à l'école que j'étais un enfant différent des autres parce que j'étais fils d'esclave.
I learned when I was at school that I was somebody different from the other kids, and that was because I was the son of a slave.
Et toutes mes querelles avec mes amis d'enfance ont été liées à cette question.
And all the quarrels I had with my school friends were linked to this issue.
J'ai eu la chance d'aller à l'école secondaire et par la suite faire l'école des travaux publics de Bamako. Et en fin de compte, j'ai fait mes études d'architecture à Moscou pendant 7 ans.
I had the opportunity to go to senior school and then on to university, which led me to study architecture, which I continued to do in Moscow.
Et tout au long de cette trajectoire, j'ai toujours posé le problème de l'esclavage parce qu'il m'a toujours travaillé et j'ai toujours été contre l'esclavage. Je tenais à ce que mes relations avec mes amis mauritaniens ont toujours été conditionnées par leur acceptation ou le refus de combattre l'esclavage et de le dénoncer.
And throughout my life, I have always denounced the system of slavery, and with all the relationships of friends has been based on whether they, my colleagues and friends, whether they accepted or denied the fact that slavery persisted in Mauritania.
Je n'ai jamais accepté d'appartenir à une association d'étudiants qui ne reconnaît pas l'esclavage.
I didn't accept to be part of a student association that didn't accept that slavery existed.
Et ainsi, je suis parmi les premiers qui ont contesté publiquement l'esclavage en Mauritanie. Et en 1978, nous avons créé une association pour parler de l'esclavage et le dénoncer publiquement aux yeux du monde.
I'm one of the first people in Mauritania to in fact denounce slavery in that country, and in 1978 with other colleagues we set up the organisation. C'était quoi l'organisation? Al-Hor.
Organisation pour la libération et l'émancipation des Haratin.
The organisation was called Al-Hor, and it was for the liberation and emancipation of the Haratin.
Et en 1981, l'ordonnance abolissant l'esclavage a été prise quelques mois après notre emprisonnement pendant 3 mois et notre procès à Rosso, qui était un procès de l'esclavage tenu par un tribunal militaire.
In 1981, we were arrested, myself and some colleagues, for denouncing slavery, and this we were held for 3 mois.
3 mois.
For 3 months, and soon after this, when we were released, the government, the president, ordered by decree that slavery was again abolished.
C'était l'affaire Boubacar Messaoud et consorts. Le jugement, l'affaire en justice s'appelait l'affaire Boubacar Messaoud et consorts.
The case was Boubacar. The case before the courts was called Boubacar and others, Boubacar Messaoud and others.
Cette petite introduction, c'est pour vous dire que les abolitions en Mauritanie, les actes pris par la Mauritanie, l'État mauritanien, n'ont jamais été des actes gratuits. C'est des actes qui ont été précédés par une lutte de personnes, de personnalités mauritaniennes, qu'elles soient d'ailleurs de toute couleur et de toute ethnie.
I'm explaining this to you because I need you to understand that if we are where we are today, it's after a long campaign of resistance and campaigning for the abolition of slavery by a wide range of actors in society.
L'esclavage que nous connaissons en Mauritanie est un esclavage traditionnel. C'est un esclavage qui dure depuis plusieurs siècles.
The slavery system in Mauritania is a traditional form of slavery which has persisted over hundreds of years.
Il est transmis par la mère.
It's transmitted by the mother, by descent.
Les enfants d'une femme esclave sont automatiquement esclaves.
It is an inherited status, and therefore the children of a slave woman are automatically slaves.
Et les esclaves d'aujourd'hui sont en fait des descendants de plusieurs générations d'esclaves.
And in fact, the people who are enslaved today are slaves of people who were enslaved generations ago.
On ne réduit plus en esclavage quelqu'un chez nous.
Nobody is reduced to slavery in that traditional sense.
Tous les esclaves qui existent sont des descendants d'esclaves.
All the slaves that existed in Mauritania are descendants of slaves.
Aussi, cette situation donne un caractère particulier à cet esclavage.
There are certain characteristics to this type of slavery.
Les esclaves sont soumis à leur maître, ils acceptent leur statut, ils ne connaissent que leur maître, ils ne connaissent que la tribu de leur maître, et ils sont en fait enfermés dans ce système.
Slaves are subjugated, they are dominated by their masters, they know nothing else but their masters. In fact, they know nothing else but that system.
En comparaison avec l'esclavage que vous avez dans vos mémoires, l'esclavage américain, où on a des esclaves enchaînés, où on a des esclaves qui sont enfermés, on a des esclaves qui sont battus. En Mauritanie, les esclaves ne sont pas enchaînés, ils ne sont pas enfermés, ils sont libres de circuler, d'aller et venir, mais ils sont liés à leur maître comme on peut être lié à sa branche de salut. C'est-à-dire que leur repère, le chef de leur famille, le chef de leur groupe, tout ce qui compte pour eux, c'est leur maître, parce que leur avenir et leur présent dépendent de ce maître.
Okay, as opposed to the type of slavery that you're probably more familiar with in the US, whereby people were held in chains and publicly or openly beaten. In Mauritania, slaves are not held in chains. They're not beaten publicly. They are free to move about, but they are intrinsically linked to the master's family. The head of the family is the master. Sorry, I lost that last. Le dernier mot. Oh yeah, sorry. They're attached to their master. Their future, their present and their future, basically linked to the master.
C'est pour dire que l'esclave est résigné, et cette résignation, elle a aussi une origine et que nous dénonçons. C'est l'instrumentalisation de la religion musulmane.
Okay, to tell you that slaves are resigned, and the origin of that resignation, which is something that we denounce, is the instrumentalization of Islam.
Cette instrumentalisation de la religion est un phénomène qu'on connaît bien dans l'histoire de toutes les religions et de toutes les oppressions.
This is something that we're all familiar with, the instrumentalization of religion.
Toujours est-il que la religion musulmane à laquelle j'appartiens est une religion pour la liberté et qui milite pour le droit de tous les hommes à l'égalité. Mais les musulmans mauritaniens et beaucoup de musulmans africains et par ailleurs dans le monde souvent continuent à avoir des esclaves en instrumentalisant la religion et en pensant et en disant que c'est un droit divin, en utilisant des choses qui sont le mensonge, en utilisant le mensonge pour garder leurs esclaves auprès d'eux.
Mm-hmm. However, as you probably know, Islam, of which I am a Muslim, is for equality, and Muslims, particularly in African Muslim countries, have often sought to justify slavery by using Islam, by saying that somehow they have a divine right, that God is giving them a divine right to have their slaves. But these, as you know, are just lies.
Comme vous avez vu dans le film tout à l'heure, les esclaves apprennent dès leur enfance que leur sort, leur destin dépend de leur soumission. Et plus ils sont soumis, plus ils ont des chances d'aller au paradis. C'est aussi simple.
So slaves in Mauritania are subjugated, and their subjugation means that they have to give respect to their masters, and that their paradise is linked to being obedient to their masters.
Mais en plus de cette histoire de religion manipulée, il y a également les rapports de domination. Leurs maîtres sont les maîtres du pays. Leurs maîtres, c'est eux qui sont les propriétaires des terres, c'est eux qui sont les propriétaires des puits, c'est eux qui sont les propriétaires des bétails, c'est eux qui sont souvent les ministres, c'est eux qui sont souvent les présidents de la République, c'est eux qui contrôlent l'accès à la terre à l'intérieur et qui contrôlent l'accès à l'emploi dans la ville. Donc, ils ont tout pour rester soumis et résignés.
Okay. Apart from the religious domination, it's important to know that the slave-owning class are also the dominant people within the country. That is to say that they dominate the land, the wells, the animals, that they have control over all these aspects, that they are, in effect, in control of the state apparatus.
J'ai dit seulement les phrases sont trop longues, pas les présentations.
Donc, je continue. J'ai dit donc, en ce qui concerne donc, cet esclavage, j'ai essayé de le caractériser. Je vous ai dit donc qu'il est un esclavage traditionnel. Il n'a rien à voir avec l'esclavage moderne, parce que nous avons l'esclavage moderne, comme vous l'avez ici. Donc, pas de confusion entre l'esclavage traditionnel en Mauritanie et l'esclavage moderne et la traite des personnes.
Mm-hmm. So I've just tried to explain in a few words the characteristics of this traditional or chattel form of slavery, which is quite distinct from contemporary forms of slavery, which you're also very much familiar with in the US, that is to say trafficking in persons and forced labor associated.
Là, vous me permettrez une comparaison. L'esclavage moderne, c'est quelqu'un qui est capturé dans des conditions particulières et se trouve employé ou exploité par quelqu'un, mais il connaît d'où il vient, il connaît son origine, il est né libre, il connaît la liberté. Alors que l'esclave traditionnel, il est né esclave. sa mère est née esclave, sa grand-mère est née esclave, et il ne connaît que son maître. Alors c'est différent. Faire la confusion, c'est malhonnête et c'est criminel.
Okay.
L'esclavage moderne est différent de l'esclavage par ascendance.
Okay, just to explain that today people who fall into contemporary forms of slavery know where they come from. They may be enslaved and forced to work against their will, but they have known freedom. But the slaves in Mauritania have been born into slavery, and all they know is slavery. All they know are their masters.
Donc, je m'en vais, à partir de ces explications, parler de la situation actuelle. Parce que l'esclavage, chez nous, a duré pendant des siècles. Il y a des choses... Il a évolué. Souvent, la question qui se pose, est-ce que les esclaves sont maltraités? Est-ce que les esclaves sont battus chez vous? Est-ce que les esclaves sont vendus? Je vais répondre à cette question très clairement. Les esclaves, aujourd'hui, sont rarement battus. Sont rarement vendus, et s'ils sont vendus, c'est sous le manteau. C'est quelque chose qu'on cache, mais on le cache depuis très longtemps. Parce que déjà, dans notre tradition, vendre un esclave pour un maître, ça veut dire qu'il est lui-même en déchéance. L'esclave fait partie du patrimoine. Comme chez vous, quelqu'un qui est réduit à vendre ses meubles, il ne les vend pas devant tout le monde parce que ça veut dire qu'il n'a plus rien. Et chez nous, quelqu'un qui est réduit à vendre son esclave, ça veut dire qu'il est vraiment tombé très bas. Donc, on vend rarement les esclaves et on les vend, quand on les vend en cachette.
Okay.
Ça, c'est une chose.
When talking to journalists often come to Mauritania and ask, they want to see slaves. And I have to tell you that it's not easy. It's a hidden practice. Slaves are not beaten and they're not, for the most part, sold. If they are sold, it usually means it's a dishonor, basically, for the master. It means that he's probably fallen on hard times because, and if so, if you're going to sell your slave, you're not going to do it very publicly because you don't really want people to know that you've fallen on hard times.
Et la traite des personnes a existé chez nous. La traite de l'esclave, je veux dire. Elle a existé chez nous. Et la seule chose sur laquelle nous sommes d'accord pour dire que la France a fait quelque chose chez nous, c'est qu'elle semble avoir arrêté la traite. Mais rien de plus.
Just to say that the transatlantic slave trade, or the trade across the Atlantic existed also. Well, slaves were sourced also from Mauritania, and France achieved one thing at least. It did stop that trade.
Et aujourd'hui, nous avons surtout un esclavage qui est atténué, fort atténué, mais il reste toujours un esclavage. Vous avez entendu tout à l'heure le monsieur qui dit qu'il a des esclaves, mais que lui-même, il les entretient et c'est lui qui pourvoit à leurs besoins. C'est ce qu'il a sous-entendu. Mais ceci est tout à fait normal. Moi, je veux répondre à ce monsieur que lui, en donnant de l'argent à ses esclaves, il achète son prestige. Ça fait partie de sa culture. Il lui revient de s'occuper de ses maîtres, de ses esclaves et de les entretenir. C'est comme quelqu'un qui a des moutons ou qui a des chèvres, il est obligé de les nourrir. Et dans la mesure où ces chèvres et ces moutons sont liés à lui et sont prêts à aller avec lui, quand il y a des élections, ils votent pour lui, ils votent selon ses consignes et ils sont de son côté. Okay. Et dans toute affaire, ils sont ses principes, sa défense. Il ne peut pas aujourd'hui vouloir faire croire au monde que l'esclavage a changé de camp et que c'est les anciens maîtres qui sont aujourd'hui devenus les esclaves de leurs esclaves. C'est ce qu'il a sous-entendu tout à l'heure.
I just want to respond perhaps to the man in the video, to the gentleman who was saying that in fact his slaves, he has a special relationship with his slaves and that he looks after them. Well, that's part of his culture. If he gives them money or if he gives them food, that is part of his prestige, just as he would feed his sheep or his goats or his camels. That is part of the role and the responsibility of the master.
avec les années de sécheresse, beaucoup d'esclaves ont pu se libérer parce que leurs maîtres n'avaient plus de biens, n'avaient plus d'animaux, n'avaient plus de terres à cultiver. Et des années 74, 76, 77, nous avons connu un exode rural massif qui a ramené beaucoup d'esclaves dans les villes. Et ils sont toujours de statut esclaves, mais ils sont dans les villes et ils sont libres de leur mouvement et ils travaillent pour eux-mêmes.
During the 1970s, a drastic drought affected Mauritania, which meant that many masters lost their herds and that many slaves left their masters. There was a big exodus, in fact, during that time. But just because they left their masters does not mean that they lost their status as slaves.
Ces esclaves sont en ville, ils travaillent librement, mais vivent les séquelles de l'esclavage parce qu'ils sont souvent discriminés. Ils n'ont que des emplois marginaux, ils n'ont que la rue à balayer ou à vendre de l'eau. Et ils sont très nombreux. Donc, mais ils sont des esclaves. Et souvent, au décès de l'un d'eux, nous voyons son maître revenir de la brousse pour demander les biens qu'il a laissés parce que son esclave et sa propriété et ce que son esclave détenait comme propriété lui appartient.
Today, the people who left the rural areas came to the urban areas, and they are many, and they suffer what are called the vestiges of slavery, or I prefer the word legacy of slavery, in the fact that they are highly discriminated against and only have access to very menial jobs. Often on the death of, and they remain slaves, so on the death of a slave, even in the urban environment, you often see the master coming down to town to try and appropriate the slave's belongings.
Et ces mêmes esclaves reçoivent fréquemment leurs maîtres dans leur maison, en ville, les reçoivent comme on reçoit son maître, les nourrissent, les logent, et quand ils vont repartir en brousse, ils leur font des cadeaux, ils leur donnent ce qu'ils ont comme une partie de leur économie, et ils sont donc liés à leur maître et ils n'ont aucun problème. Donc ils continuent à accepter leur statut et à vivre comme des êtres soumis et, disons, acceptant leur sort.
Okay. Often masters will come, in fact, into town and stay with their with their slaves.
Pour en revenir, donc, beaucoup...
Just to say that people continue to accept their status, continue to accept the relationship that they have with their masters, even though they're not under the day-to-day control of their masters, they accept the authority of their master over them.
Dans ce cadre-là, je voudrais également dire que les esclaves, néanmoins, restent encore dans la brousse, dans la campagne avec leurs maîtres, dans les animaux et dans les champs et comme domestiques.
Just to let you know that there are still slaves in the rural context. Many herders out with the master's animals, and many of the women, particularly women, work in the domestic environment.
Et l'élément le plus vulnérable dans notre esclavage, c'est aujourd'hui la femme et les enfants.
Those who are most vulnerable in this system are women and children.
L'homme peut s'en aller dès qu'il peut et personne ne peut le retenir et il n'a derrière lui rien parce qu'il n'a même pas l'habitude d'être avec ses parents. Depuis son jeune âge, il est avec ses maîtres.
For it's easier for men to leave, they leave less behind. Their familial ties are just connected to the master.
La femme, elle a plusieurs contraintes. Elle est souvent gardienne de troupeaux de moutons. Elle court derrière les moutons le jour. Elle est la nuit en train de préparer le repas. Elle se lève la première et elle se couche la dernière. Elle garde les animaux. Et parfois, elle revient à la maison avec un petit du mouton et avec un bébé aussi qu'elle a accouché en brousse. Ça arrive. Ça paraît paradoxal et c'est une extrémité, mais ça arrive.
For women, however, they've got much more responsibilities. They're often having to look after the herds of goats, often responsible for all the domestic chores, for cooking, for looking after the master's children. They're the first to get up and the last to go to bed. often to tell you that, I mean, it can happen that a woman can even give birth in the bush.
Maintenant, je vais en venir à la loi et à l'aspect juridique de l'esclavage chez nous.
So now I'm going to come to the law which criminalizes slavery and the legal framework.
Je voudrais être précis pour qu'on rapporte bien ce que j'ai dit. L'esclavage en tant que système est illégal en Mauritanie depuis 1905. De par, d'abord, la Constitution française dont nous étions colonie. Par la suite, en 1960, à notre indépendance, nous avions eu une constitution qui s'inspirait de la Déclaration universelle des droits de l'homme et qui déclarait l'égalité de tous les hommes. Et en 1991, notre constitution également a repris cela. Et nous avons également d'autres lois. D'abord, l'abolition de l'esclavage formel a été faite en 1981. Ceci pour dire que nous avons un arsenal juridique qui, en fait, proscrit l'esclavage. Donc, l'esclavage est illégal en Mauritanie depuis longtemps.
Just to recap for you, slavery was first abolished in 1905 by the French colonial government, and then in 1960, when the Constitution was written, it was inspired by the language of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, providing equality to all citizens. And then again, as we mentioned earlier, that slavery was abolished by decree in 1981.
Mais je ne vais pas être comme le dernier orateur qui a dit tout à l'heure que l'esclavage n'existe plus parce qu'il n'existe plus juridiquement. Il n'existe plus juridiquement, mais il existe dans la société. La société mauritanienne pratique l'esclavage, nonobstant les lois qui ont été prises et les constitutions qui sont toutes reconnues universellement comme positives.
So, just because slavery has been abolished in law does not mean that slavery has been abolished in practice.
Donc, c'est ainsi que nous disons que l'esclavage aussi a une autre caractéristique. Et je voudrais aussi là lever des ambiguïtés et des mensonges. L'esclavage en Mauritanie n'est pas une question raciale. L'esclavage mauritanien n'est pas une question raciale, c'est une question sociale. Il est pratiqué par les Noirs, il est pratiqué par les Blancs. Quand bien même la majorité écrasante des esclaves sont des Noirs. Donc,
just to let you know that slavery in Mauritania is not a race issue. Slavery is being practiced by the white Berber Arabs, just as it has been practiced by other black ethnic groups in Mauritania. However, it does continue to be practiced in the former, predominantly in the former group.
Les Mauritaniens militants des droits de l'homme et démocrates épris de justice et de paix ont lutté toutes ces années-ci, pendant plus d'une dizaine d'années, pour obtenir une loi criminalisant l'esclavage. Et nous l'avons obtenu avec les dernières élections. Suite aux dernières élections, le président de la République a bien voulu, suite à des pressions importantes de la part de la société civile et des partis politiques concernés, faire promulguer une loi qui a été votée par l'Assemblée nationale. Et cette loi est en fait le principal objet de notre démarche, c'est-à-dire pour le trouver, pour que cette loi soit appliquée et pour que cet acte majeur pris par le gouvernement de Sidi Cheikh Abdallah soit reconnu et pris en charge par tout le monde pour qu'il soit traduit dans les faits.
There has been a long, sustained campaign by civil society groups, human rights groups, for the criminalisation of slavery, which came into being due to the change in the regime in Mauritania and the election, well, the first free and fair elections that were held in Mauritania in 2007. And one of the first acts of this democratic government was to propose a law criminalising slavery. And just to let you know that the law was passed unanimously by both houses of parliament.
Sans rien enlever au mérite du président de la République aujourd'hui d'avoir pris cette loi, il faut reconnaître que cet acte n'est pas venu gratuitement de sa part. Au moment des élections, avant les élections, le président Sidi Cheikh Abdallah ne parlait que de séquelles de l'esclavage. Et nous l'avons visité en tant que candidat, parce que nous avons interrogé tous les candidats pour savoir quelle est leur position par rapport à l'esclavage et qu'est-ce qu'ils feront s'ils deviennent président de la République.
Just to let you know, without detracting at all from this initiative, this law didn't come easy. In fact, the president, when we first met him during the presidential campaign, when we were asking all the presidential candidates what their position was with respect to slavery, his position was that, in fact, there were only vestiges of slavery, remnants of slavery. And so he has been... Carry on, pardon.
Ce n'est pas un acte gratuit.
Oui.
Donc je termine, je continue. Oui. Donc nous avons assisté à l'époque, pratiquement tous les présidents ont accepté et déclaré que s'ils sont élus, ils feront quelque chose. Pour ceux qui étaient pour la lutte contre les séquelles de l'esclavage, comme ceux qui disaient qu'ils seraient pour la lutte contre l'esclavage lui-même parce qu'il existe. Et au moment où on est passé au deuxième tour, le président a signé un accord avec le parti qui s'appelle Alliance pour le Progrès, Alliance populaire pour le progrès, qui était un parti dirigé par des anciens militants de cette organisation dont je vous ai parlé au début, El Hor, et qui ont demandé au président de signer un accord avec eux. Ils vont voter pour lui au deuxième tour, mais à condition qu'il signe cet accord, qu'il va prendre une loi criminalisant l'esclavage et réorganisant le retour des déportés mauritaniens qui se trouvaient au Sénégal et au Mali. Et ceci, à mon avis, il est bon de le savoir parce que c'est ça qui est à l'origine de cette loi. Donc, et cette loi a été...
I just want to explain to you that what brought the president, in fact, to accept the criminalization of slavery. In order to be elected, he had to do a deal with the alliance, the political party, which is called the Popular Alliance for Progress. And the conditions for this coalition, essentially, one was the criminalization of slavery, and the second was the return of the deportees.
Et c'est ainsi que la loi a été votée, promulguée, et l'Assemblée nationale a été à l'Assemblée nationale a été promu le chef de ce parti qui s'appelle Messoud Ould et qui était l'un des principaux dirigeants de l'Hor depuis sa naissance. Et donc, il est devenu président de l'Assemblée nationale et trois autres ministres de son parti, trois personnes de son parti sont rentrées dans le gouvernement pour défendre et participer à l'application de ces engagements pris devant le peuple mauritanien.
It is the president of the APP party, Mr. Boukhir Messaoud, who is now the head of the National Assembly, who was principally responsible for getting this law pushed through the Mauritanian Parliament.
Aujourd'hui, nous félicitons le gouvernement de Sidi Cheikh Abdallah et Sidi Cheikh Abdallah lui-même pour cet acte que nous estimons courageux parce que la majorité du pouvoir sont des gens d'extraction esclavagiste et c'est une décision courageuse. Nous la reconnaissons à sa juste valeur et nous encourageons et nous demandons à ce que même le gouvernement soit encouragé et félicité par tout le monde, mais nous demandons aussi à nos partenaires, à nos amis, d'aider le gouvernement mauritanien parce que c'est une véritable aventure, c'est une véritable gageure que de vouloir résoudre le problème de l'esclavage parce qu'il est beaucoup plus important qu'on ne le pense. Il est très profond et il nous faut plus d'une décennie pour pouvoir en sortir si vraiment on s'en occupe sérieusement.
We would like to congratulate the new government and the president. We believe that this is a courageous step that the president took and that the parliament has taken. But we have to be we have to be vigilant because this is a deeply embedded practice in Mauritania. It's going to take time to be eradicated, and we have to appreciate that, and we have to work hard to make sure that slavery is eradicated.
Aujourd'hui, nous demandons l'amélioration de la loi parce qu'elle ne prévoit pas pour l'Organisation des droits de l'homme d'ester en justice. de se porter partie civile. Et c'est important dans le cadre d'une démarche contre l'impunité de ceux qui continuent à pratiquer l'esclavage.
Today, although we are pleased that with the criminalisation of slavery, we are campaigning for the law to be strengthened, particularly to enable NGOs and individuals to be able to access, to have locus standing, to be able to take cases on behalf of victims of slavery.
Nous demandons également des mesures d'accompagnement qui sont indispensables parce que les esclaves ont besoin d'avoir du travail, d'avoir des moyens économiques pour pouvoir être indépendants, pour ne pas avoir à recourir à ce monsieur qu'on a vu tout à l'heure qui dit que c'est lui qui donne de l'argent à ses esclaves. Nous estimons que l'État doit mettre en place une politique à même d'insérer tous les anciens esclaves et que nous puissions avoir dans un temps assez long, au moins 10 ans, la possibilité de dire qu'on va éradiquer l'esclavage en Mauritanie.
In addition to the locus standing of local NGOs, we are calling on the government to implement accompanying measures to this law, particularly socio-economic measures, including policies of affirmative action, so that those who are leaving slavery can finally will be able to lead economically independent lives and will not be vulnerable to a situation where they are where they have to return to their masters for help. And this is really an essential action if we are really serious about eradicating slavery in Mauritania.
Un dernier mot par rapport aux chancelleries. Nous qui avons lutté depuis des années contre l'esclavage en Mauritanie, nous ne pouvons pas ne pas dire que certaines chancelleries ont été à côté de nous et nous ont aidés, nous ont assistés et ont tout fait pour qu'on nous sorte parfois de prison. Et l'ambassade des États-Unis en fait partie. Même si nous n'avons pas toujours été d'accord avec sa vision des choses, parce que souvent elle a soutenu la vision de séquelles et de vestiges, mais toujours est-il que c'est l'une des ambassades qui connaît bien le problème et qui l'a suivi. Chaque fois que nous avons dénoncé un cas, l'ambassade des États-Unis s'est intéressée à ce cas. Et chaque fois que l'un de nous a été arrêté, elle s'est intéressée à son arrestation. Et nous leur demandons d'aller plus loin dans le soutien du gouvernement mauritanien et pour qu'ensemble, nous puissions résoudre un problème qui n'est pas simple. Je vous remercie.
I just want to add, a last word, and that's with respect to diplomatic.
Excusez-moi d'avoir été très long.
With respect to diplomatic missions, particularly the American mission, we really appreciate the fact that the Americans have always been attentive to the issue of slavery, even if we haven't always been in agreement about its manifestations or the extent to which slavery is practiced. We really very much appreciate the United States' support, and we would like the United States to go further in supporting the Mauritanian government in this new time, and to support the Mauritanian government in seeking to end slavery. Thank you, and sorry for being so long.
Thank you very much, Boubacar, for that impassioned description of the situation on the ground. I'd now like to turn to His Excellency Ibrahim Dia. He is the Ambassador of Mauritania here in Washington. I believe he is very personally engaged on this particular issue, and I'd like to get his thoughts as a representative of the government on progress on this issue. Thank you, sir. Yeah, go ahead.
First of all, I would like to thank you for giving me the opportunity to give the perspectives of the newly elected government. I would start by expressing our gratitude to Open Society for the active role the organization have played in the abolition of slavery in our country. I would like to say how the Haratin community and Mauritania as a whole is grateful to Boubacar Masoud and his group for what they have been actively doing to help our country to get rid of slavery. In Boubacar's introduction, he did mention that slavery in our country has significantly evolved. I would be very concise. Slaves in Mauritania, I think, most of them, a large number of them is free. I think we do not we have a common understanding on that issue. They are free, but they still enjoy their status of being former slaves. Especially in the big cities. In the rural area, the situation is quite different. I agree on what he said. One point I would like to mention is we have in our country a wrong interpretation of the notion of slavery in the Islam. A total wrong interpretation of slavery and when you look at the situation of the slavery in Mauritania, I take an example from my hometown in the south of Mauritania. I have grown up with people who claim that they came from slave families. But during the whole time I spent in my hometown, in Selibabi, I never had one of my child friends showing to me the master of his parents. I have never seen it. I grew up with them, but I never witnessed one of them saying, this is a master of my parents. Never. So the situation is different from an area to another. From cities to the rural areas. But let's agree, there is a persistence of slavery in Mauritania. It has been a historical practice. To get rid of it would not happen overnight. It's just like some Western countries have been doing to get rid of the stigma of racial discrimination. We have Western countries who have experienced such kind of practices. But we agree that it takes time to get rid of it. I have been away from my country. We have been ashamed to note that our country we have been ashamed of the persistence of slavery in our country. We are determined, since we have achieved a significant step toward the democracy in our country. We have organized elections in our country which have been described by the European Union as the most democratic and transparent ever organized in Mauritania since its independence. We cannot, in our country, have that kind of appreciation from the international community and continue to enjoy or to continue to be complacent with the practices of slavery in our country. We are determined. The government is absolutely determined to get rid of it. So what we are doing in terms of concrete steps to make sure that we are totally in concordance with what we have achieved in terms of the democracy. Boubacar did mention the new legislation criminalizing the slavery. He said that it was not granted. It resulted from a pressure. I agree. It was not granted. He spent the whole of his life fighting for that kind of legislation. But I think there is something which we should point out: the determination of the newly elected president. His own determination as a human being, as a good practitioner of Islam. He is honest with himself, and he has committed himself during his mandate. He will do all what he can to make sure that our country has made a significant step towards abolition of the stigma of the slavery. Obviously, there are resistance. We have groups, we have individual people, not willing to conform to the legislation. Unfortunately, Mauritania doesn't have enough resources to make sure that the legislation is fully implemented. So we have adopted a new national legislation criminalizing the slavery. We believe that the abolition of slavery is not only a matter of legislation. We want to make sure that the legislation will be fully implemented. The government is considering an affirmative action. This is something we perceive in our country as a special policy towards vulnerable groups in general and former slaves in particular. An affirmative action, a special policy towards former slaves. We are campaigning within Mauritania, outside Mauritania, to make sure that we get the needed resources, the required resources, to make sure that we implement the legislation. The government has set up an interministerial committee that have been campaigning for the last, 4 weeks, 5 weeks, to make sure that the new legislation is understood by each Mauritanian citizen. That the page of persistence of slavery should be turned. The interministerial committee has been doing that work, and we want to make sure that as rapidly as possible, the affirmative action is translated into concrete action on the ground. We have the support of our partners. We are determined to move forward. We rely on ourselves, we rely on our partners, and we rely on the support of our partners within Mauritania. So I think having Boubacar next to me advocating that the government is absolutely determined. This is something new in our country. I think this is his first time since to have a Mauritanian ambassador next to him, talking similar, I mean, nearly the same language on this issue of slavery in our country. So we are proud. We are no longer ashamed. We are proud that we recognize the persistence or the stigma of slavery in our country. We are determined to get rid of it forever. We recognize that it has been a historical practice. We no longer deny it. We want to have a full concordance between what we do in our country, inside our country, and what we say outside of country. It has been a long lie and a huge distortion between what has been practice and persistence in our country and the foolish language and the statement we have been saying all over the world. So we are totally coherent in what we are doing. The government has been tasked to do something specific. I mean, the president is absolutely determined, and this is our commitment. We no longer hide anything. We recognize that there are strong stigma. We want, our partners to help us to get off it. But I think Boubacar agree with me that it has become more an economic and social issue than how do you call it, an issue of a status. People are free to move from A to B, but we need enough concrete action on the ground, on the economic and social ground, to make sure that gradually this group of people in Mauritania become totally independent. I thank you.
Thank you very much. I want to open it up to questions. I have a couple of my own, but I think it would be fairer to give the audience an opportunity. Boubacar, on va rentrer au panel. Donc, je veux ouvrir la conversation aux audiences. Could I see if we have any questions? Yes, ma'am.
Hello, this was a really fascinating discussion, and thank you for doing this, both sides. My name is Caroline Bledsoe. I'm at the Wilson Center as a scholar. And, of course, I know that Africa as a whole has a very long history of slavery, and there are various degrees of this in the past with continuities today, whether we call it slavery or something else. What I'd like to ask you is, given the problem sometimes in actually implementing the ideal language, and I think you've both done a wonderful job of talking about this, the difficulties of the ideal language applied to practice, when in fact sometimes what you do is you try to enforce the policy and you drive the practice underground, or you pull people apart who don't want to be pulled apart. They don't have the means to fully exist yet, so you put people in difficult situations. I'd just like to hear some more of the middle discussion about the pragmatics of doing this and the kinds of cases you see and what the government might be doing in the middle. Does that make sense?
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Rather than answering one question at a time, may I ask if there's a couple more, and then we'll come back to the panel? Fine. Yes, ma'am, and then you, sir. Go ahead.
Hi, my name is Jennifer Curry, and I'm curious, when you put something into place like this as a law, if it just exists as a law, it's obviously not going to be doing very much. I'm curious, since I know it's been very short that it's been implemented, but have there been people that have been brought to trial, criminal trial, and what has happened to them? And not only to them, but I think what ends up happening as far as the protection of the former slave or former victim is really important. So I'm wondering if you could address some of the things that have happened.
And one more, sir.
Thank you for the wonderful presentation. It's just incredible to hear these stories. My question is about the. First of all, my name is Bahati. I work with Africa Faith and Justice Network. Is it possible to free a slave who do not want freedom? And this question is for the ambassador. With regard to what you say about the status, it seems that some people still are holding on to their status, and it's difficult for them to think otherwise. What would be their status then? Or do they desire to just be free, or they just enjoy it, and as you said?
I'm going to propose that the ambassador goes ahead and answers that question while Romana gives a quick translation of the other two questions, and then we'll go ahead with those. Go ahead.
Yeah. The in response to your question, the slaves in Mauritania are free. I think the scholarization rate is growing, which was not the case some years back. Some of them enjoy high-level position in the government. Some of them are entrepreneurs. Some of them member of the National Assembly. And some of them are in the army and have high-ranking position within the administration. So they are free. But when I say they enjoy their status, some of them enjoy their status. It's like something very strong cultural stigma. They have inherited a culture that their parents have been linked to so-called masters. I don't know if you understand. I mean, they are free, but they enjoy the status of having one or another day, or their parent had one or another day that kind of status. And the link remains sometimes very strong. They are, some of them, not willing to break down that strong relationship for different reasons. So it would take time. It would take time for them, in their mind, to break down that strong relationship or strong link. Maybe 1 or 2 generations. Hopefully, one generation.
But could I follow up? I understand that there are elite individuals who are now, to all intent and purpose, without constraint. But there are also many people who are dependent on masters for their economic survival, who do not feel that they have choices to move. And so I suppose I wonder to what extent they are genuinely free. Is it a correct description?
No, they are free indeed. But those who remain, or those who enjoy the strong link or the strong relationship, those who enjoy that status because they don't have any existence means to exist by themselves, they don't want to break down that relationship for one single obvious reason. You leave your what's so-called master, you don't have any resources to exist by yourself. So what we are trying to do to get these people free and exist by themselves. And this is precisely the aim and the main objective of the affirmative action policy. We have criminalized the slavery. We want to get it effective from the day we have adopted in the National Assembly. We don't want to keep it, as words who are not translated into concrete action. This is precisely what we are intent to do. Affirmative action, it is being implemented. It has been implemented in some Western countries. It is under implementation in South Africa after the apartheid regime. Affirmative action is a special and a specific policy dedicated to a targeted group of individuals, of people. We want to get these people independent and exist by themselves. It will take time. But this is the aim of the affirmative action policy, to translate the legislation into concrete action.
Okay. Thank you. I want to suggest we go to Boubacar, and perhaps in responding, he could also respond to the question about the extent to which the law has been applied.
He just wants to add a little bit to what the ambassadors just said in response to, is it possible? Someone?
Possible.
Yeah.
Oui, je voulais dire simplement que je peux citer un exemple. Il y a 2 semaines, moi je suis membre de la Commission nationale des droits de l'homme. Et il y a 2 semaines, nous avons été en mission à l'intérieur du pays suite à la plainte d'un monsieur qui dit que lui, il a fui l'esclavage depuis quelques années, mais que sa grande sœur est toujours avec ses maîtres. Et nous sommes allés trouver cette femme avec lui en mission. Il y avait moi, une sénatrice qui est membre de la commission et un avocat qui est membre de la commission. Et on a trouvé cette femme. Son frère l'a trouvée. Elle a refusé d'aller avec lui. Elle a dit qu'elle préfère rester avec sa maîtresse. Parce que sa maîtresse est malade. Et qu'elle ne partira jamais laisser sa maîtresse malade. Okay. C'est un peu pour dire que ça existe.
I understand you've understood, but just for everybody else to understand. I'm a member of the National Human Rights Commission, and only last week...
2 weeks ago.
2 weeks ago. 2 semaines. Excuse me. Vous êtes où?
À Vermederdra, dans la brousse, pour chercher
He went into the bush to locate a woman. In fact, a man had come to SOS claiming that he had run away from his master several years ago, but that he'd left behind his sister. Boubacar went on mission with 2 other members of the National Human Rights Commission, and when they got to where the sister was living, she refused to go with her brother. And she said that she would not go because her mistress was sick and that there's no way that she could possibly leave her mistress. That's it? Okay, l'autre question, l'implémentation de la loi, est-ce qu'il y a des cas devant la justice?
Oui, en ce qui concerne la loi, s'il y a des cas devant la justice, il n'y a pas de cas devant la justice actuellement, mais c'est parce que nous avons rencontré des mauvaises volontés, de procureurs et de juges d'instruction à l'intérieur du pays. Mais nous avons déjà eu des cas qu'on aurait dû pouvoir avoir devant la justice. Et ça fait partie de notre inquiétude par rapport à la loi. Nous avons déjà attiré l'attention des autorités qu'il faut que la loi soit appliquée.
Des cas antérieurs à...
Non, ce n'est pas antérieur. Il y a 2 mois.
I think Tunisia has
moins de 2 mois.
With respect to the implementation in the law, there have not yet been any cases in court with respect to slavery. However, there should have been, because we have had several cases that we would have liked to take to court, but the prosecutors refuse to accept them as slavery cases. And this, in fact, is part of our worry about the implementation of the law.
Can I just...
Please do.
Yeah, I just want to... I just want to assure Boubacar that things sometimes get slow to be implemented on the ground in an effective manner. But the administration, the personnel of the public administration, sometimes reluctant to implement that kind of measures. But I think as we move on the implementation, on the sensitization regarding this new legislation, as we move forward in the implementation of the affirmative action policy, I think the government would be extremely firm on the implementation of the new legislation. I think, Boubacar, you may recall that governors, mayors have been in a very effective manner sensitized on this new legislation and have been tasked to make sure that this legislation is fully implemented on the ground.
I think so, yeah.
Just so I can add my little bit. This is a courageous move by the Mauritanian government, there's no doubt about it, but it's caught us campaigners who've been bashing our heads against the wall with the former regimes a bit by surprise. In fact, as soon as the president got in, immediately moved towards criminalisation, and we really salute that move. However, we are really concerned now because in the preamble of the legislation, the government is committed to implementing accompanying measures, and this is really essential. The law by itself, we can take a few masters to court, but essentially what we need are a whole array of activities, and it goes with the judiciary. We need to train the judiciary. We need the judiciary, not just the judiciary, but also the police, to be aware of what slavery is and that it is illegal. We also need the judiciary to be trained in human rights norms generally. So it is a long process. As Boubacar has explained to you, this is a practice that is deeply embedded. It is, in my opinion, not just a socio and economic practice. It is also a cultural practice. Mauritania is a highly hierarchical and stratified society, and it's going to take time. But the government needs to really show its commitment. We need a sensitization and awareness-raising campaign that is going to reach everybody, just as in this country or in the UK where I come from, when we have a drink driving ban and a campaign. We need to make it clear. The government needs to make it clear that it will no longer tolerate it. So that's one thing. Then we need, sorry,
I'll
Ambassador,
come back to you in a moment.
excusez-moi. Then we also need the social and economic measures. The Ambassador's already mentioned the affirmative action. We haven't had any indications yet by what the government means by its affirmative action policies, and I'm very, I welcome what the Ambassador says, but as you can imagine, we are impatient. We're impatient to learn and to work with you on this. Social and economic measures, education is key. Education, quality education to children who have been excluded for generations. Families have been excluded from education for generations. And we need to target the Haratin community in particular. We also need in my opinion, a law, a comprehensive anti-discrimination law, because we've just heard that people who are descendants of slaves they have this stigma. They may not be physically or literally enslaved today, but they certainly suffer from total exclusion and marginalization in this country. And in order to address that, we need to strengthen this current legislation with an anti-discrimination law, which will also guarantee the rights of other ethnic minorities that are also, discriminated. Anyway, I won't go on, but that was just my little bit.
Fine, I'll pass it back to the ambassador who would like to respond.
Yeah, I think, I mean, you are fair enough with the newly elected government. You are fair enough. We have been there for the last 10 months. I think we are doing our best to move as quickly as possible. But let's work together. We make sure that we advance our common objective. We are working with our partners to make sure that we get the required resources. I think we do not yet have the details of the affirmative action policy, but I think the sensitization, the training of the police, the human rights and on human rights, the taking into account an anti-discrimination aspect in that affair, I think it would be certainly a comprehensive policy, not taking one aspect and excluding another one. The government is working on a very comprehensive policy that includes social, economic, human rights aspects. Make sure that we implement a policy that produces the desired results. But I would like just to ask you, you can remain fair with us. 10 months is a very short a period of time. Hopefully we are there for the forthcoming years. And I wish we assess what we are discussing now in 4 years' time.
Boubacar.
Moi, je voulais ajouter quelque chose pour édifier un peu l'assistance et également répondre à mon ami l'ambassadeur. En fait, il y a, comme l'a demandé la dame tout à l'heure, il y a bien des cas que nous avons présentés à la justice et aux autorités pendant ces derniers mois. Il y a ces cas, par exemple, nous avions une femme qui avait 2 enfants, une fille de 15 ans et un enfant de 13 ans, que des militants en nous ont découvert comme gardiens de troupeaux avec une famille dans une localité qui s'appelle Guérou, à côté de Guérou. Et on nous a informés, on a cherché la maman de ces enfants, on a trouvé que c'est une esclave qui a fui elle-même ses maîtres depuis quelques années. Et on l'a fait venir, on l'a envoyée dans la ville et elle a été accompagnée par un militant. Ils sont venus au commissariat de police. Elle a fait sa déposition et elle s'est plainte de ses maîtres. Elle dit qu'elle les a fuis à cause du traitement, du mauvais traitement.
Should you not do a translation?
It's okay, go on.
Du mauvais traitement. Et elle n'a jamais pu revenir prendre ses enfants parce qu'elle n'osait pas revenir. Le lendemain, elle est revenue pour signer le procès verbal. On a trouvé que le commissaire de police a enlevé tout ce qui concerne l'esclavage de sa déposition. Et elle a refusé de la signer, bien sûr. Et en définitive, le commissaire de police a envoyé cette déposition au tribunal, au procureur. Et 15 jours après, le procureur a classé l'affaire parce que c'est une affaire qui n'est pas une affaire d'esclavage. J'ai vu, moi, le procureur général pour cette affaire. Et le procureur général m'a répondu, cette femme, c'est elle qui a abandonné ses enfants. Et ces gens-là, c'est eux qui ont nourri ses enfants depuis 5 ans ou 6 ans. Et j'ai discuté avec un ami très haut placé, dont je ne citerai pas le nom. Je lui ai dit, mais ce n'est pas normal, pourquoi on ne poursuit pas ces gens? Il me dit, mais vous n'avez pas suffisamment, les enfants, la femme a retrouvé ses enfants. Est-ce que vous avez besoin de mettre quelqu'un en prison?
Okay, Romana, I think
yes,
you should.
Nous le cherchons.
Yeah, I think you should do it because everybody else who can't understand is waiting for a long time.
Sorry. I just want to give you an example of a case that we presented in court not so long ago of a woman who was looking for her children, She had 2 children, a boy of 15 and a girl of 15 and a boy of 13. The woman was guarding her troops, a troop of cattle in Geru. And she told us that she had fled her master years ago due to her master's treatment of her. SOS Esclaven took her to the police station where she made a statement. The next day she returned to the police station to sign the statement, and the police had taken out every reference to slavery. And the police, so Boubacar and his colleagues went to see the judge, and the judge said to him, but this woman, she abandoned her children, and these other people, they have been feeding her children. So what do you want me to do about it? La fin, c'était quoi?
C'est elle qui a abandonné ses enfants.
Yes.
Et que eux, ils les ont nourris. Et donc, on n'a rien à réclamer.
So there is no reason for us to prosecute these people.
Dans l'histoire, l'enfant, garçon, est borgne. Il a été éborgné après le départ de sa mère.
The boy, was blinded after his mother left him.
Mais ceci, nous le disons non pas pour dénoncer qui que ce soit, mais nous disons qu'il y a des résistances. Et il y a des résistances vis-à-vis desquelles il faut être ferme, sinon on n'avance pas.
I'm not just saying this to shock you, I'm just giving it as an example that we need to act.
Et tant qu'on n'aura pas puni un esclavagiste,
and until we
on n'aura pas la preuve qu'on est sérieux pour les esclavagistes eux-mêmes.
And until the time comes that we actually prosecute someone for a crime of slavery, then we won't be taken, the law and the efforts of the government won't be taken seriously.
I'm conscious that time is marching and people can't stay for very long. Yes. I would like to just close with one question to the Ambassador. You mentioned in your presentation that you thought that Mauritania could use some help from its friends in this effort. What would you like to ask from those friends? What should the United States be offering Mauritania in the way of assistance for dealing with this problem?
Yeah, we had a consultative group meeting with between the Mauritanian government and the donors community in December in Paris. I was saying earlier that we are no longer hiding anything. We had a presentation in that meeting by a special advisor to the president on on these issues, who had a very long and detailed presentation in this specific issue of slavery and the repatriation of refugees. So we did explain to our partners, to the donors community, what we intend to do in terms of abolition of stigma of slavery in Mauritania, targeting especially, talking especially about social and economic projects, make sure that these people exist by themselves. Some of the donors committed themselves to assist Mauritania in implementing that affirmative action policy. What we are campaigning is we need to get rid of it, but we cannot do it by ourselves. So any partner willing to help Mauritania to implement in an effective manner this affirmative action is welcome. So we are talking to the partners like European Union, the Arab Gulf funds. We have been engaging with the USAID and other partners to make sure that we raise the required resources to make sure that we move as rapidly as possible. This is the determination of our president, to move as rapidly as possible. So we are raising some money, but it's a long, very complex process, but there is no way to step back. We are moving forward and willing to do everything we can to make sure that our partners stand along our sides to make sure that we move forward. The not isolated the cases, the persistence or the multiplication, the finding cases like Boubacar just mentioned, it will continue. We cannot pretend in a short period of time we will not have that kind of cases. We will. But I think the president will make sure that the government take very, very concrete action on the ground to make sure that police justice is fully aware of his determination, his commitment to make sure that this kind of practice never happen again in our country.
Thank you very much. And I think we'll take you up on your suggestion that we ask you to come back and talk to us again about this, perhaps not in 4 years, perhaps a little sooner than that. But we're most grateful to you for joining us today and giving us such a strong sense of your commitment to the issue. I also want to thank Boubacar. I think we should probably bring it to an end at this point because it is quite late, but I want to thank you very much, Boubacar Massaoud and Romana Kakioli.